Greetings! In this video, we will review setting keyframes and manipulating those keyframes in the graph editor. Then we will go through the process of rendering the individual frames as a batch render. And finally, we'll compile the batch render into an animated GIF. Before we get started, because we're working on the animation, we've already set up our lights, we really don't need the interactive Arnold render view. So I'm going to make sure that stop is selected. In other words, you'll see the play button. That means that if you press it, it will play. So it's currently stopped. We'll go ahead and minimize the view. We'll minimize that Arnold view. We'll check before we render, but as we're working here, we don't need that interactive feedback. My outliner is available to me, my channel box is available to me, and my timeline and range slider are also available. Let's begin by making sure our resolution gate is on, and that's this blue circle here. We can click that, and now we can see the edge of our render. We'd set it to 1024 by 1024 square in the last lesson, and before we render, we'll actually change that. But as we get warmed up, we'll go ahead and leave it at this 1K square. Moving down here to the range slider and time slider, right, the outer fields, so the outer left field says 1, the outer right field says 200. That means we have 200 total frames in our universe, and we're currently looking at 1 to 120. Let's go ahead and give ourselves a total of 100 frames, and if we click that in the outer field, it'll automatically populate the inner field. And we'll do the same over here. We'll make sure that we're at 0, and we'll look at 0 frames. So we're going from 0 to 100. Outer fields 0 on the left, outer field on the right 100, inner field 0 to 100. So our time slider and our range slider match. Now we'll select our object, just one brick. We'll have it start out of the field of vision, move into the space, hold its position, and then move out, just as a refresher to setting keys. So I have this selected. I'll make my channel box available. And we'll slide this out on the translate Z so that it's out of view. And we'll set our first key. Reminder, there's 3 ways that we can set keys. We can set keys directly on the attribute. I could select translate Z, right click, and say key selected. I can also hit S on the keyboard shortcut. And if I do that, note that all the attributes have a key set for them, which sometimes is desirable, sometimes it's inefficient, but that's the method we'll be using today. And I'll actually do it the long way. I'll come to key, set key, just so that you can see when I've done it, but you can go ahead and hit S on the keyboard. Now a reminder, we are moving in time, so I've moved to frame 0. We've manipulated the object. I've set this out of the field of view, and then I came and thirdly hit set key. So move in time on the timeline, manipulate your object, and then set the key. And we'll repeat that. Let's come to frame 30. So I've moved in time. We'll manipulate the object. Let's just slide it in on the Z. We'll say that it stops in about the middle of this scene here. And we'll hit S on the keyboard, or I'll come up to key, set key. And then you'll recall that the trick was having it hold its position. If I just come out to frame 60 and move it again, it will not hold this position. So I'll come out to 60, and we're going to skip that second step of manipulating the object. We're going to leave it here. So at frame 30 and at frame 60, it has the same exact position. And we'll come and we'll hit set key. And then finally, let's come out to, let's say, frame 90, and we'll slide it out of the field of view. So we moved in time to frame 90. We've manipulated the object, having taken it out of the field of view. And then we'll say key, set key. And now I'll press play. And this is happening not in real time. It's playing every frame as fast as the graphics card will play. And that's good for dynamic simulation, where each frame is predicated on the previous frame. But for keyframe animation, we'd like to see it closer to real time. So we'll click on our shortcut to preferences, the little running man there. It automatically opens us up with the time slider selected. And here is playback speed, and we'll select 24 frames time 1. We'll go ahead and minimize that and then press play, and now we have a closer to real-time version of the animation. So give that a shot, and then we'll come back and we'll start this actual assignment. So I'm going to press stop, and we want to get rid of that animation. And so we'll come up to Edit, Delete by Type, Channels. Now, if I said all by type, that would be fine because it's going to delete all of the keyframes in the entire scene. And since we only have it on this yellow brick, that would also be appropriate. But you do want to distinguish between performing a function by type and all by type. So I'll say delete by type, channels. You see that those little red keyframe indications have disappeared now. And when I slide in the time slider, the animation is gone. So we'll start fresh here. I am going to choose a whole number for my translate X, right? So that's in this direction. Let's say 13. And that's so that I can also have this brick at 13 out. So we'll come to translate X and we'll also have it at 13. And this is rotated, the red brick, so we'll set that, if I set it to 0, it will be backwards. I'm going to imagine that these are crashing into each other. So we'll choose to rotate Y and we'll make that 180. And we'll animate these each one at a time, and we'll have them come in and crash, and you'll see initially that it looks more like a magnet snapping together, and that's will be our opportunity to jump into the graph editor, break the tangents, and then create that bounce effect or that V in the actual graph. So let's repeat. Let's go to frame 0. Make sure you're at frame 0. I'm just going to start with my yellow brick, and once again on the Z, I'm going to slide it out. If we want to pick a whole number, that would be okay. So I'll say 30. So in my view, and yours is going to be a little bit different. I've got the translate X13 for both of these bricks that are going to crash, and then I've translated it out of the view and just selected a whole number, -30. So move in time, frame 0, manipulate the object, -30, translate Z, and we'll set the key. I'll do it the long way, key, set key. And on that yellow brick, we see the first key set here, that red line. And just a reminder, if you click off, you won't see a red line, all right? The red line keyframe indications in the time slider only appear for the object that's selected. So I'll reselect that, and you see that the red line reappears. And let's say that this crash happens at frame 30. And we'll bring this in, and you'll recall that 2.5, in this case -2.5, puts us right at that center line. So I've moved in time to frame 30. I've manipulated the object. In this case, we're saying translate Z as -2.5, and we'll set that key. And then you just want to scrub the timeline to make sure that's working. So at frame 0, the yellow brick is there out of the field of view. At frame 30, the yellow brick is right in the center at -2.5. Now let's switch over and we'll animate our red brick. I'm going to slide it out, and if we wanted to use that same 30, we could. And we want to be at frame 0, translate Z 30, and then we'll come to key, set key. So I moved to frame 0. I moved the red brick out of the field of view. In this case, I translate Z of 30, and then we're clicking set key. Now we'll come to frame 30, and I'm going to scroll out a little bit just so I can see my brick to be able to slide it forward, or I could have just come in and typed in the 2.5. We'll recall that puts them right together. Now if you start moving, you might lose track of where the edge of your field of view is. Sometimes I'll have you lock the camera down so that mistake isn't made. But with a simple scene like this, you'll just, if you do make some adjustments, before we render, we'll make sure that those bricks are starting out of the field of view. And thirdly, we'll come and set key. Now if I scrub, right, if we're just looking at the red brick, at frame 0, translate Z is 30. At frame 30, translate Z is 2.5. And we can play this now, and these two bricks come in, but they're slowing down, right? So they're slowing down and stopping right with each other. When we want this to appear to be a crash, and so there's a couple of additional steps that we'll need to do, and this takes place in the graph editor. So let's come to frame 30, and either brick selected. We'll need to do this on each. So I've got my red brick selected, and we'll come to Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. And right, we're working on the Translate Z, so I'm going to click the Translate Z attribute in the Graph Editor, and we'll hit the F key. Remember that the F key will frame or focus on what's selected. Now, initially I hit the F key and my panel wasn't active. And so you might have to just click into the panel, and then when you hit F, that will work. And you can see the flat tangent. So here's our key at frame 0, here's our key at frame 30. You can look up here and see the attribute value. So at frame 0, translate Z as 30, and at frame 30, translate Z as 2.5. And the computer has filled in the graph here. And this is slow, these are flat tangents, and that just means when I select them, you can see that the tangent handles are flat. And it starts off slowly, it hits a uniform rate of speed here in the middle, and then it slows down. But we want it to appear as an abrupt stop. So we'll grab the handle, right? This is the keyframe, and this is the handle. And I'll use the middle mouse button. In previous versions of Maya, you also had to have the Move tool selected in order to manipulate the graph. That's not the case in these later versions of Maya. So sometimes if you're looking at an older tutorial, I am specifying that you need to have the Move tool selected. But in Maya 2020, 2022, any of your transform tools will allow you to manipulate the graph. But I am using my middle mouse button. And I don't want to pull up beyond because this would change the direction, right? But what this is saying is that it'll start out slowly, its speed accelerates, and then it's coming to an abrupt stop. And let's go ahead and just take a look at that now. So you can see that it, right, kind of comes and sticks while the yellow one is slowing into position. We'll correct the yellow, Windows Animation Editor, Graph Editor. You could put your graph editor in one of your views. My screen, because I'm recording, is a little bit smaller, so I'm going to minimize and maximize the graph editor just to make it easier for you to see. So this was translate Z, right? And we're coming from the other direction, but it's the same process. We'll select the key, then we'll select the handle, and with my middle mouse button, we'll pull that down until we have a curve that looks like this, starting out slowly, and then accelerating and coming to an abrupt stop. If we play it in this case, it looks as though they're kind of magnets or that they're sticking together. They accelerate and then snap into place. And so in order to get a crash-like effect, we want them to rebound. So they hit and then that energy dissipates as they each go in the opposite direction. So I'll press stop here. And since I've got my yellow one selected, let's just start with that. And so let's say it takes 10 additional frames. So back to our move in time, manipulate the object, set the keyframe. I have my yellow brick selected, currently from 0 to 30, and then we'll come to frame 40. So move in time. And let's slide this back. So the current position is negative 2.5 on the Z. Let's put that back to negative 10. Nice whole number, and we can do the same on the red brick. And then we'll set the key, right? So move in time, we move to frame 40. Manipulate the object, we change translate Z from negative 2.5 to negative 10, and we'll say key, set key. Now, we've got some additional work before this will function properly in the graph editor, and you can see the mistake there. Now the yellow brick is moving through, penetrating the other brick. And why is that? If we set it at 30, and you can kind of scrub through here and see at 30 it's there, but then it begins to move forward even though we didn't set it moving forward. And that has to do with the way that the flat tangent is trying to average those curves. So we'll come back to the graph editor, and we'll just click right on translate Z so that we don't see the static channels. And there is that value of negative 2.5. Here is the value that we set at negative 10, but it has tried to average that curve. And you can see that the handles are connected on each side, so if we tried to correct that, we'd be manipulating the other side as well. And this should be review if you completed the bouncing ball exercise. We want to break this tangent. So this V-like shape, and if I leave my cursor over it, you can see that it says break tangents. I have the key selected, not the handles, and we'll click break tangent. Now the handles turn into a dotted line, and that's an indication that they're independent of one another. I'll select the handle, and then with my middle mouse button, I can slide that down. And so this is what our crash curve should look like. Starts out slowly, accelerates, and then abruptly changes direction and then slows into a stop. And so we'll take a look at it just on the yellow here. We'll watch that crash. And so you see there's a nice natural position. Not having done it on the red, it appears as though the red is a greater mass, heavier than this object here. So you can keep that in mind if that's something that you're after. But we're going to imagine that these are identical objects with identical mass. Select the red one. Just to review, 0 to 30. So we'll come to 40. We remember that's what we did with our yellow. And we chose 10, so we'll put positive 10 here on the translate Z. Just to review, move in time. I've moved to frame 40. Manipulate the object. I've set the translate Z to 10. And then we'll establish that. We'll lock that down. We'll say key, set key. And if we scrub through here, right, we've got the same thing happening on the red. It is not abruptly changing direction. You can even see that it's not penetrating, or maybe it is just about there. Because we've animated the yellow, it appears as though it's coming forward and pushing that back. But we're going to imagine that they meet in the middle and then each rebound. So with this selected, Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor, you can have your Graph Editor open. I'm just continuing to reopen it because of the size of my screen. And we'll choose on Translate Z, and you can see that same thing here. With the connected tangents, it's trying to average on either side. This is great for floating. Anytime you're animating something that's floating, this is desirable. But we're imagining things working on a ground plane. I'll hit undo just to get that back to where it was. With the keyframe selected, we'll come up and we'll hit break, and then we'll grab that handle and middle mouse button, pull it up. And this looks a little bit more like the bouncing ball, right, because it's on the positive direction. And we can select both of these, and let's look at just the translate Z's for both of these. Oops. Skip select is command. And so this is the shape, right, of our curve. They move in. When they touch each other, they abruptly change direction and then come to a slow stop. I'll click off and we'll look at our animation. Right, so we have natural movement. They're starting out of the view, coming into the view. There's no penetration. They touch and they abruptly change direction. So you want to experiment with that. You can try that several times. If you run into a problem and you just want to start all the way over, remember, in this case, if we wanted to just get rid of all of our animation, we could come to Edit, Delete All by Type, Channels, and you could start fresh. We've given ourselves 100 frames, so right, our action ends here at, let's see, yeah, it ends at frame 40. So we've got 60 additional frames. Let's just do something fun and we'll have this yellow one move out of the way. So let's build in a pause, right? We started by recalling that if we want something to maintain its position over time, we're setting a key without any change in value. So with this selected, we're still at translate Z -10, and at frame 50, we'll key that. So we've moved in time to frame 50. We're skipping the idea of manipulating the object. We're leaving that value at -10, and then we'll say key, set key. So it's just going to pause from 40 to 50. And then let's say another 10 frames, 60. Let's have it move out of the way. We'll just have it drive sideways. Let's say 20 on the X. We'll set that. So moved in time to frame 60. We've manipulated translate X, and we'll key, set key. And then now that it's out of the way, let's have it drive forward. And let's say that takes 60, 70, 80, 90. And we'll have that drive out of the view, and we'll set that key. So now we can play that and see what that looks like. So they crash and then move out of the way. And let's just have the red brick move forward. Since the yellow brick moved out of the way, the red brick can just move forward. but we'll also have it, let's have it delay. So let's have it, let's say we'll start at 70. So we'll key this at 70. I've moved in time to frame 70. And right, this is going to be static. So I'm leaving the translate x at, the translate z at 10, leaving that at 10, and we'll key that. So the translate x is 10 at frame 40 and frame 70. That means that the red brick is holding its position. And then over the course of the remaining 30 frames from 70 to 100, we can drive it out of the view. And recall that we want the objects to start out of the view, come in, have the action take place, and then move out. You can think of actors on a stage. The curtains open, there's no actors on the stage. The actors come, perform, and then they leave. And so that's what we're after here too, and that will give us a perfect loop when we create our animated GIF. And final thing, set key. And there we have it. I'm going to click off so that nothing is selected. We'll press play, and now we've got a nice little action. So those are the parameters. The objects need to start out of the view. You're animating some type of crash between your bricks, and then it's up to you to have those bricks move out of the view so that we get a nice loop. Right? There's nothing in the scene. In terms of these bricks are not in the scene. They move into the scene. Action takes place, and then they move out. Okay, give that a shot. We'll come back. We'll set up our batch render in the next section of the video. Be right back. Okay, welcome back. I'm going to open the Arnold render view, and let's just press play, and we'll make sure that we like everything. That we like the light, we like the reflectivity, we like the way that our shadows are cast, and we'll just imagine that that's fine. Once again, hit stop if you wanted to make some adjustments because of the animation, if you want to change your light angle or the overall illumination in the scene. If you wanted to change the quality of the color of any of your bricks, you could do that now. Make those determinations. I'm just going to imagine that this is fine. I'm going to press stop then, and we'll minimize the Arnold render view. And we'll move on to setting up the batch render. All of the frames will be rendered individually, and then you'll use a third-party application. Today we'll be using an animated GIF creator. If you're creating an actually finished animation, we'd be rendering larger, and we'd be using an application like After Effects or Premiere to compress those frames into an MPEG-4 at full high-def resolution. But for today, we'll create just a small square animated GIF. I'm going to open the render settings here, and we've got Arnold available, so that's what our batch render will use. And I'm in the common, and you could name this, right? You could name it brick. Since it's on your local drive, you can name it whatever you like. You're not handing in these individual frames, so I'm not asking you to put your name on it. We're going to render as JPEG, and then in order for us to render the individual frames, we need to set the animation extension. And that's name.number.extension. There's lots of variations of that, and so it's fairly common to, the first time you're going through this process, to select the wrong one. So take a look there, name.number.extension, that's the one that we want. And if you look up here, it says bricks.0001.jpg0010. So currently it's just set up to render 10 frames, but you'll note that they have the same number of digits and ending with the extension there. And that means that most third-party applications that are reading frames will be able to order those correctly. So next, right, it's only rendering 10 frames currently. We want it to render 100. So we'll come down to frame range and we'll type in 100. And then take a look up here, bricks 0001 to bricks 0100. And we'll be rendering those 100 frames. Actually, I'm sorry, we want to go from 0, don't we? We started at frame 0. So start frame 0 in frame 100. We went ahead and animated in our perspective view. When we get into more complex assignments or projects, you'll typically be creating a camera that you're going to render from. So this is also important. Today we can just leave it at perspective, but in future projects you really want to make sure that you're rendering the proper camera. Not uncommon to wait for an entire render to take place and you realize you've rendered the wrong view. So render camera will leave that at perspective. And just because we're working with different processors, we're going to be uploading this. Let's just make it a little bit smaller. So this isn't anything that we're putting in our portfolio, right? We're just going to create this little 512 animated GIF square in order for you to present it. When we get to the midterm and the final, you'll be rendering it full frame. But for today, we'll just create a little 512 square. Quick review, we've named it, we chose the image format JPEG, name, dot number, dot extension, start frame 0, end frame 100, and we've made this a 512 square. Make sure that Arnold is render, and we're not going to change anything. We're just going to use the default renders, especially because it's so small and the scene is very simple. I can close that, and then in order to execute the render, we'll switch modes. I was currently in animation. We'll move this to rendering. So I'm in the rendering. Here we see render, and we'll hit batch render. Now, before I do that though, actually, let's come back to render settings and just review where those are going to render to. On the Mac, it's my name, my computer name, Documents, Maya, Projects, Default Images. And I actually don't recall what the path is on the PC. So one of you PC users, if you would, in the comments of the tech discussion forum, whoever gets there first, if you, first PC user, if you would just list that there. But regardless, you're rendering to your default folder. It should be the same on both operating systems. However you get out to Maya Projects default, and all of these frames will be rendering to your images folder. So when we get to the third-party application, whether that's Premiere or After Effects, or for today, our animated GIF creator, that's where we will locate the frames. Take a look there. Go ahead and close that, and then here we will render. So render, batch render. This will render in the background. If you wanted to watch it, you could click render sequence and it would render in the foreground. But you can hit batch render, and with a light render like this, you could be working on other things in other applications. And I'll just go ahead and hit that here. And we can see down at the bottom, and if there's a problem, it usually occurs before frame 1 is rendered. So I'll just wait here for a moment, and we'll make sure that that gets going. And there we see the render started, and it rendered frame 1. Now it's on to frame 2. So if the computer has any problem or crash is most likely to happen before it gets rendering. And so now we can see those frames rendered out. Also, a good reminder, you should have saved. I should have reminded you to save or increment and save before you started this process, because there is a chance. These days, Maya and the operating systems are very stable, but it may crash, and in the past, it was more likely to crash. So this is an opportunity to remind you, increment and save. Save often. Every time you get something that you would hate to lose, or every 5 or 10 minutes, do a save or an increment and save, just to be safe. And we're up to frame 15. I'll be back at frame 100, and we'll talk about creating the animated GIF. Be right back. Welcome back. We can see that the render has completed, and so we'll move on to compiling the animated GIF. Open your web browser, and you can type in easygif.com, easygif.com, and then we'll click on GIF Maker. So on the leftmost, the first tab, GIF Maker, and we'll click on Choose Files. Sometimes you might come here first. We have to choose the files before we can hit Upload. So we'll hit Choose Files, and remember that long path to your default folder with images. You want to find that, and make sure that you're selecting the 000. If it was listed backwards for some reason, you had 100 first, you want to make sure that you're selecting 000, and then we'll scroll down and shift select 100. So we have them in proper order from 0 to 100, and they are all selected. And we'll hit upload, and then we'll click on the upload and make GIF button. And this will take a moment. And there we are. We're going to scroll down. You can see all 101 frames, 0 to 100. And the delay is set to 20. We're going to set that delay to 2, which will give us as close to real time as possible. So our delay time is 2, and you can see that they've all now switched from a delay of 20 to just a delay of 2. So just make sure that they all say 2. And then we'll click Make GIF, and this will take a moment. And there we have our animation that we created. But it's a little bit large. And because this is just for a class project, this isn't anything that's going in your portfolio necessarily, we'll go ahead and compress it or optimize it. So we'll click on the Optimize button, and it tells us here that 35 is very light, which is what it is currently, and 200 is very heavy. So let's split the difference and come somewhere in the middle, let's say 126, somewhere around there. And we'll take a look at it and see if it's okay. And we'll click Optimize, and this will take a moment. And there we have it. So there's a little bit of noise, but that'll be okay. It'll make our upload much quicker. And you can see it went from 4 megs down to 1 meg, which is about where we want it just for this class exercise, uploading to the bulletin board. When we have more finished work, we will of course be compiling it in an application like Premiere or After Effects. All right, and then final thing we want to do is hit save. That will save to your downloads folder, and then you can drag that from your downloads folder. If you want to save it on your local drive, that would be smart, but you'll then upload it to the shared bulletin board. All right, questions in the technology discussion forum. Have a good one.